I don't know how to love you, she whispered. But I want to try. I'm tired of living behind these walls. Maybe we can figure this out together. That's what she told him, not in a moment of weakness, but in a moment of quiet courage. Clara, a woman forced into a life she never chose, standing in front of the man who was once nothing more than a contract, and now somehow becoming her safe place. And Nathaniel, a man who had built his world on distance and power, was willing to risk it all, not for control, but for connection. This isn't a story about perfect beginnings. It's about slow healing. It's about trust when trust feels impossible. It's about learning to love. Again, if you've ever wondered whether something real can grow from brokenness, if you've ever held your heart behind walls built by pain, this story is for you. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, where we bring you tales that heal, stories that stir your soul, and moments that remind you you are not alone. Now, let's begin. Nubn mun minch, ko thvit. Them voiceover script, the o nhpth. Igyanva mnhcbnd, dang d nung video. Hn bn so mu nh tar phn o kong. There was a time when Clara Reynolds believed her world would always be wrapped in the warmth of laughter, in the comfort of belonging. That was before one cruel winter morning when everything changed, not gradually, not gently, but all at once, like a flame snuffed out without warning. She was only 19. The phone had rung before sunrise. She could still hear her mother's trembling voice, barely recognizable through panic, and then silence. That silence had never left her. That day, the girl who once danced barefoot in the garden with her father, who stayed up late whispering secrets with her mother, vanished. In her place stood a young woman with empty hands and a hollow chest. Her parents had been taken from her in a roadside crash no one saw coming. A story buried in the local news, quickly forgotten by everyone but her. The funeral came like a cold wind, sharp, fast, and unforgiving. She remembered how her knees almost buckled as they lowered the caskets, how strangers muttered condolences through tight lips, afraid to look her in the eye. Grief didn't just hurt. It isolated, it made her invisible. Clara wasn't just mourning the loss of her family. She was mourning the loss of home. After that, she went to live with her only remaining relatives, her father's older brother Leonard and his wife Marissa. They lived in a quiet suburb outside Ashburn, in a gray house with neat hedges and colder hearts. They never said it out loud, but she felt it. She was unwelcome. Not in the way a guest overstays their visit, but in the way a stain won't wash out. Leonard rarely spoke to her unless he needed to, and Marissa's smile never reached her eyes. To them, she was a reminder of tragedy, a disruption, a cost. Clara kept to herself. Her bedroom was small, tucked in the attic with slanted ceilings and a window that looked out at a narrow alley. She'd sit there for hours, knees to her chest, watching the clouds shift across the sky, wondering if anyone in the world still saw her. Years passed, and Clara grew into a woman whose presence turned heads. But she never saw beauty when she looked in the mirror, only a girl pretending not to break. Her hair now a soft chestnut that curled around her face, her gentle gray eyes, they were a shield, not a gift. When she turned 24, the whispers began. She heard them sometimes through the walls, low voices, quick pauses when she walked by. Leonard and Marissa had started to see her not as family, not even as a burden, but as a bargain, a way out of their own quiet desperation. And Clara, still grieving, still lost, was too weary to realize just how far people would go when they believed they had nothing left to lose. Clara had never seen herself as a bargaining chip, but that's exactly what she had become. To Leonard and Marissa, her beauty was not something to be cherished. It was a commodity, a quiet power they had long waited to use. Her gentle innocence, her untouched grace. These were not virtues in their eyes, but advantages. By the time Clara turned 24, it was clear they had been preparing for this for longer than she realized. The late-night whispers, the hushed arguments behind closed doors, the way Marissa's eyes lingered on her just a little too long. It all made sense now. One evening, when the sky outside wept a steady rain, and the old pipes of the house echoed the cold, they called her downstairs. The dining room was dim, the overhead light casting shadows that felt more like bars than illumination. She sat uncertain across from them and waited. Leonard didn't even look at her when he said it. "You'll be marrying Dominic Halbrook." The words struck harder than any storm. Clara blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. The name curled around her like smoke choking heavy, inescapable. She felt the walls of the room grow smaller, the air thicker. Dominic Halbrook. Even the name sounded sharp, a man known, not for his kindness, but for the way he built his empire, calculated, cold, relentless. He was 57, a man twice her age with wealth that stretched across continents, and a gaze that made people flinch. She had seen him before in business articles, news, broadcasts, whispers at the market. A man who never smiled unless it served him. A man who looked at people not as souls, but as pieces to be moved. She had never spoken to him. Never wanted to, but now she was being given to him. "You'll be helping us," Marissa said, with a softness that barely hid the steel beneath. "He's agreed to clear our debts. All you need to do is your part." Clara's stomach turned. Her voice came out small, strained. I won't do this. I can't." Leonard looked at her then, not as family, but as an investor ready to collect his return. "You will," he said simply. "You think we've cared for you out of kindness. You owe us, Clara. And now you'll repay it." Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. But inside she was unraveling. The following days passed in a haze. The house grew quieter, yet every moment screamed. Marissa handed her a gown one evening. Ivory lace with delicate stitching. Beautiful in a cruel, ironic way. It wasn't a dress. It was a sentence. On the day of the wedding, Clara moved like a ghost through someone else's life. As she stood near the altar bouquet in hand, her fingers trembled. The white roses smelled too sweet, too pure for the moment they had been pulled into. She stared ahead, barely able to see through the blur of fear. Across from her stood Dominic, tall, composed, unreadable. His dark suit fit him like armor. His eyes, cold and calculating, didn't waver. He didn't smile, he didn't nod, he simply waited. A man about to receive what he'd been promised. Clara felt her heartbeat echo through her ears. Nothing about this was hers. Not the dress, not the name she would soon take, not even her own future. And yet, the world expected her to say yes. She couldn't breathe. Each note of the wedding march echoed like a warning bell inside her chest. As Clara stepped forward, veil trembling over her face, it felt less like a ceremony and more like a sentencing. There he stood. Dominic Halbrook, sharp suit silver at his temples, a statue of wealth and power. His ice-blue eyes held no warmth, only expectation. He did not smile. He did not blink. He simply waited. To him, this moment was a transaction. Nothing more. Clara's heart hammered as she reached the altar. The priest's voice swam around her like fog words, heavy and distant. "Do you, Clara Reynolds, take Dominic Halbrook as your lawfully wedded husband?" She opened her mouth, but the words refused to come. They stuck like stones behind her teeth. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. But then her eyes caught a glimpse of Leonard and Marissa in the crowd, sitting with quiet pride as though this was their triumph. The pressure crushed her. The weight of all the unseen chains she carried, debt obligation, loneliness, pinned her in place. "I do." 2 words whispered, and with that, her freedom slipped through her fingers like sand. The applause that followed was thunderous but hollow. Clara smiled. But it wasn't real. It was the kind of smile you wear when the world is watching, but your soul is screaming. That night in the silence of her apartment, a space so small she could stretch her arms and touch both walls, Clara stared at her phone. A message lit up the screen. "Let me know when you're ready to talk. I'll be in Eastbridge until Friday. Nathaniel Wren." Her fingers hovered over the screen, trembling. Nathaniel, a name she barely knew. A man whose presence carried weight, older, distant, impossible to read. Yet he had offered her a way out, a way forward, but at what cost? She scrolled back to their earlier exchange. It was simple, direct, almost too calm. He had offered her stability, not affection, security, not freedom, but in the world she lived in now. Even that felt like mercy. How do you say no to the only door left unlocked? Clara looked around the room, its peeling paint, the faded photographs of her parents taped to the fridge. The air still carried a trace of her mother's favorite soap, like time refusing to move on. She heard her mother's voice echo gently from memory. "Find your strength, sweetheart. Even if it hurts." But strength hadn't been enough. Her world, the one where people loved without asking for something in return, was gone. With a slow breath, Clara reached for her coat and stepped outside. The wind was sharp, the pavement still wet from the morning rain. Eastbridge, a city she once found comfort in, now felt like another stranger. She pulled her coat tighter. There was no more pretending. No one was coming to rescue her. Nathaniel's offer had arrived, not as a miracle, but as a lifeline tossed to someone already sinking. Her hands were cold, her future uncertain, but she walked forward anyway. This wasn't the life Clara Reynolds had imagined for herself. She used to dream of love that grew like wildflowers, unexpected but honest. A life with purpose, shaped by her own choices. But now she found herself standing at the edge of something that felt nothing like a dream. This was survival. This was surrender. She stepped into the Halcyon, a restaurant carved out of luxury, all crystal chandeliers and marble floors, each surface gleaming with quiet power. The kind of place where everyone whispered, where nothing went unnoticed. Clara's coat felt too thin, her shoes too ordinary. She didn't belong here, and the moment she walked in, she knew it. At a table tucked near the window, he was already waiting. Nathaniel Wren. A man who seemed built out of shadows and certainty. Dressed in slate gray, he looked like he belonged to a different world entirely, one where people didn't hope they decided. He didn't rise when she approached, but his eyes found hers, instantly. There was something in them tonight. Not warmth, not quite, but something softer than she remembered. Something unexpectedly human. "Clara," he said simply. His voice was smooth, practiced, but edged with restraint, like a violin string pulled too tight. She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap to hide the way they trembled. "I wasn't sure I'd come." She said, her voice quieter than she intended. "I'm glad you did," he replied. No smile, no false comfort, just steady presence. Clara looked down at the tablecloth, soft linen, untouched silver, and tried to steady her thoughts. Everything in this place spoke of certainty, and she had never felt less certain in her life. "This isn't easy," she confessed. "I don't even know what I'm doing here." Nathaniel leaned forward slightly, his tone shifted, still composed. But there was something in it now, something that didn't feel like business. "I know you're scared," he said. "You should be. This isn't a small decision." Clara looked up. His gaze held hers, unwavering. "But I need you to understand something." He continued, his voice low, more deliberate. "I'm not offering this because I feel sorry for you, and I'm not asking you to say yes out of desperation." She swallowed, unsure if the emotion rising in her throat was anger or gratitude. "Maybe both. I see someone who's been through hell and kept walking," he said. "You've survived things most people never could, and you did it alone." Clara blinked, stunned by the honesty in his tone, by the simple truth of it. I'm not here to fix you, he added, almost gently. And I don't want to be another weight on your back. I'm offering you a life with structure, with stability. Yes, there are expectations, but there's also room to breathe. The words lingered between them. For a long moment, neither of them moved. She didn't know whether to believe him, didn't know if his sincerity was real or something carefully rehearsed. But she knew one thing in that moment. He didn't look at her like a debt to be paid. He looked at her like a choice. And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt the smallest flicker of control returning to her chest. I'm not promising you love, Nathaniel said softly, his hands folded on the table between them. Not now. Maybe not ever. But I am offering you something else, the chance to reclaim your life, to stop waking up every day with dread in your chest. Clara didn't respond right away. Her breath caught somewhere between resistance and relief. I believe in you, he added more gently this time. And maybe if you let yourself, you can believe in me too. Those words so simple slipped past her defenses. Something moved inside her, something small and flickering like the moment before a match catches fire. It wasn't trust. Not yet. Maybe not even hope. But it was something. She looked at him. Really. Looked Nathaniel Wren. The man who should have felt a million miles from her world now sat across from her like a quiet storm. Dangerous, but still. He wasn't offering her a fairy tale. He was offering her a map out of the dark. I don't know if I can ever love you, Clara said, barely above a whisper. Nathaniel didn't flinch. But I think I can trust you for now. A slow, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but something softer, as if he too had been waiting for someone to say those words. One step at a time, he said. And for a moment, the air between them shifted. The burden she'd been carrying for years didn't disappear, but it felt lighter. The morning of the wedding came wrapped in a silence so thick it pressed against Clara's skin. She moved like a ghost through the bridal suite, an ornate room in an old manor Nathaniel had reserved for the ceremony. The walls were dressed in ivory silk. A tray of untouched breakfast sat cooling near the window. Somewhere below the city stirred with life, but here everything felt suspended. She stood before a gilded mirror in a gown spun from dreams she never dared to dream. Lace trailed down her arms like ivy. The fabric clung to her waist with a tenderness that felt foreign. Beads sparkled under the soft light, mocking the hollowness in her eyes. Her chestnut hair had been styled in careful waves, her lips painted in a shade just shy of courage, and still none of it felt real. This wasn't a celebration. It was a crossing, a before and an after, and once she stepped through it, there would be no way back. She whispered to her reflection, her voice cracking, I don't know who this woman is. She touched her cheek, not to admire the makeup, but to feel something, anything real. All her life, Clara had faced storms. She had survived them in silence, out of sight, beneath other people's choices. But today wasn't just another storm. It was a sacrifice. The door opened with a soft creak. Marissa stepped in, dressed in a sleek navy gown, the picture of composure. She carried a smile like it was a mask she'd worn too long. You look beautiful, she said. Her tone flat a line rehearsed too many times. Clara nodded without meeting her gaze. Marissa crossed the room and gently adjusted a strand of hair near Clara's temple. You'd better get used to this, she said, barely above a whisper. This is your life now. Then she turned and left, leaving only silence behind. Clara didn't cry. Not yet. But the tears waited just beneath the surface, not out of fear, but from the unbearable weight of knowing she was walking into something that could never be undone. Marissa had been in Clara's life since the moment the police knocked on her door, telling her that her parents wouldn't be coming home. But from the beginning, there had been no warmth, only obligation. And over the years, that coldness hardened into something far worse: quiet contempt. Now on the day of Clara's wedding, Marissa wore a smile, polished, polite. But to Clara, it felt like a mask made of glass, brittle and sharp around the edges. "Everything's ready," Marissa said, adjusting the sleeve of her own dress. Her tone was brisk, businesslike. "You look lovely. The guests are waiting." Clara knotted her throat tight. She didn't need Marissa's approval. Not today. Not ever. She had already made peace with the truth. This wasn't her fairy tale, it was her sacrifice. Marissa stepped closer, her fingers reaching to tuck a loose curl behind Clara's ear. Her touch was too careful, too calculated. "You should get used to this," she said, her voice low, almost intimate. "This is the life you chose." Clara wanted to say something, anything, to tell Marissa that none of this had been her choice. She wanted to speak of the quiet betrayals, the years of silence, the weight of being tolerated instead of loved, but the words wouldn't come. So she simply nodded. Marissa left the door, clicking shut behind her, like the final punctuation on a sentence Clara hadn't written. Alone again, Clara turned back to the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her radiant yes, but empty. Her fingers trembled as she tried to steady her breath. Her chest ached with a grief that had no shape, only depth. She was about to become someone's wife. A man she barely knew. A man she hadn't chosen. And yet in some inexplicable way, she already belonged to him. When the music began, she moved as if floating a ghost trapped in lace and ivory. The staircase felt impossibly long. Each step echoed like a soft drumbeat of surrender. Below, the ballroom shimmered with light and expectation. Guests turned their heads, eyes following her like she was a spectacle, not a woman, but a scene from a well-rehearsed play, and at the front of it all stood Nathaniel. He looked every bit the part, composed, powerful, sharp in his tailored suit. But there was something else, too. A flicker in his eyes. Something almost human. Clara wondered if he too felt the weight of what they were about to do, if he too questioned what came next. When she reached him, he extended his hand. His palm was warm, steady, and yet the space between them still felt vast. The priest began to speak, but Clara heard nothing, only the thudding of her own heart. Her gaze locked with Nathaniel's. His eyes didn't waver. There was something inside them, not tenderness, not love, but awareness. As if he saw her for what she was, a woman standing at the edge of a life she hadn't asked for. "Do you, Clara Reynolds, take Nathaniel Wren to be your lawfully wedded husband?" There was no time to think, no room for hesitation. She parted her lips and answered with the only truth she had left, "I do." The words slipped from her lips like breath in winter, "I do." Clara barely recognized her own voice, soft, almost weightless. And yet as it fell into the quiet, it changed everything. A ring, cold silver, was slipped onto her finger. The metal kissed her skin with a finality she wasn't ready for. Applause followed, or at least she thought it did. The room echoed with polite approval, but it felt far away, like she was underwater, and everyone else was living above the surface. The life she had known, messy, modest, her own, was gone. She was stepping into a different kind of existence now, one built not on dreams, but on deals. Nathaniel took her hand, lacing their fingers together with practiced calm. Together they walked the aisle, and though they moved side by side, Clara felt lonelier than ever. Outside, the car waited long, black, gleaming under the golden light of the estate gates. His hand touched the small of her back, light almost careful, guiding her forward like someone handling fragile glass. But to Clara, it only made her feel owned. She slid into the seat, her gown rustling like a sigh. The door closed behind them with a quiet click, sealing them inside. Silence pressed in like a second skin. She looked out the window, the night passing in streaks of gold and gray. This was not the future she had pictured. She had imagined joy, or at least some version of it. Possibility discovery, maybe even love. But this was a cage, painted with beauty. And she was its newest occupant. When the car turned through the estate gates, Clara's breath caught. The mansion loomed like something from a different lifetime. Massive pillars, arched windows, gardens trimmed into perfection. It was everything she had never known, and everything that now belonged to her in name only. As Nathaniel helped her from the car, his hand once again brushed her back. She flinched, not from pain, but from fear. Not because he had hurt her, but because he hadn't. He wasn't cruel like she had been warned. He wasn't cold like she had assumed, but that didn't make him safe. Inside, the staff greeted them with gentle bows and silent efficiency, and then just like that, they disappeared into the polished halls, leaving Clara and Nathaniel alone beneath the glow of chandeliers. He led her up the grand staircase one step at a time, his stride steady, hers hesitant. At the top, he paused before a tall door carved from dark oak. "This is your room now," he said, voice low, almost gentle. Clara nodded and stepped in. The bedroom was beautiful, too beautiful. Velvet drapes, a fireplace quietly burning, a bed so large it looked like it could swallow her whole. Every detail was perfect, but the perfection made her chest ache. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a stage. She stood frozen in the doorway, unsure whether to step forward or turn back. Nathaniel lingered behind her, and then in a voice that carried no threat, he spoke, "You don't have to be afraid of me. Clara, I'm not here to hurt you." The words stunned her, not because they were said, but because he meant them. She turned eyes wide, lips parting as if to answer, but nothing came. No thank you, no reassurance, just silence and breath. She had come here expecting to be claimed, perhaps even broken. But what she found was something far more difficult to face. Kindness, the kind that didn't demand, the kind that asked nothing but patience, and that somehow terrified her more than anything else. Could he really be the one to protect her? Clara didn't know. She had been taught to survive, not to trust. And yet something about Nathaniel, the restraint in his words, the quiet in his gestures, made space inside her that hadn't existed before. She didn't know what to call it. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was just the absence of fear. The first days after the wedding passed like fragments of a forgotten dream. Clara moved through the hours as if underwater, each sound muted, each step uncertain. She had spoken the vow, she had stood beside him hand in hand, but her mind still looped the same question over and over. What had she truly agreed to? Nathaniel's estate was magnificent. Yes, but also vast and echoing. It was a place designed to impress, not to shelter. The walls were painted in soft ivory, the chandeliers shimmered like captured stars, but there was no laughter here, no warmth. It wasn't a home, it was a monument. Every morning, Clara woke alone. The bed, too large for comfort, was always untouched on one side. The white sheets were cold, whispering of separation. Nathaniel never crossed the threshold. He slept in the adjacent sitting room, leaving her a kind of quiet she hadn't asked for. "I thought you might need space," he had said once. And perhaps that was true, but what she needed even more was understanding. His kindness, though real, often felt rehearsed. A performance of patience, a courtesy rather than care. And Clara, sitting day after day in silence, began to wonder if she was simply another portrait in his gallery, admired but never truly known. One gray afternoon, she sat in the drawing room, her fingertips gliding over the rim of a delicate teacup. The china was hand-painted, priceless, but in her hands it felt no different than anything else in the house. beautiful, breakable, and distant. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. She looked up. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, the light behind him casting shadows across his face. His expression, as always, was unreadable, but his eyes, they lingered a beat too long. "You've been quiet today?" he said. Clara blinked, caught off guard. "I didn't notice," she replied. Her voice was steady but small. "Just thinking." He stepped closer. For the first time in days, the space between them felt charged. "You're thinking about us." She froze. The word us felt strange. Heavy. He was right. Of course he was right. Clara placed the teacup down slowly, the porcelain clicking against the saucer. "I don't know what this is," she said, her words rushing forward before she could weigh them. "I don't know how to feel. I don't even know who I am anymore." Nathaniel said nothing. He listened. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "Not like this." The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that stretched, the kind of quiet that waits, and when Nathaniel finally spoke, his voice was softer than she expected. "Neither did I. I never thought I'd be standing here," Clara murmured almost to herself. Across the room, Nathaniel stood still, his posture composed, his eyes unreadable. But something in his gaze shifted. The sharpness faded. For the first time, she saw something fragile flicker beneath the surface. Not dominance, not strategy, but uncertainty. And suddenly Clara wasn't sure who he was anymore. She had built a version of him in her mind, cold, distant, untouchable. A man who could turn promises into contracts and people into possessions. But now, staring at him in the quiet of that room, she wondered if he too was just as trapped, just as unsure. "Neither did I," he said at last, his voice low and steady. "I didn't imagine it would be like this." He added, eyes not leaving hers, "A marriage without feeling, without choice. Something that was arranged, not lived." Clara felt the air shift. She had prepared herself for many things, silence, command, even cruelty, but not this, not honesty, not vulnerability. Was he apologizing, confessing, or simply exposing a part of himself he never let anyone see? She looked down, afraid that her face might reveal too much. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. Her throat tightened as the truth spilled out. "I didn't want this life, and now I'm standing in the middle of it, with you, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that." Nathaniel didn't speak immediately. He moved a step closer, slowly, carefully, as if the air between them might shatter if he pushed too hard. He didn't touch her. He didn't reach for her hand, but something about his stillness, his quiet restraint, felt more intimate than closeness. "I know," he said, voice soft. "You didn't choose this, and I can't undo what brought us here, but I can give you one thing I wish someone had given me." Clara looked up. "Time," he said. "And space to figure out who you want to be in this." He paused, then added with quiet conviction, "I don't expect love. I don't expect anything. Not now, not until you choose it." She wasn't ready for those words. She had come into this moment armored for defense, expecting demands, not grace, but his calm, his restraint, his willingness to step back instead of forward. It disarmed her more than any gesture could. She stood slowly, her legs unsure beneath her, the weight of their shared silence pressing against her chest. How could she trust him? How could she open her heart even a little to the man who had unknowingly shattered the life she once dreamed of, and yet beneath all the ache, something stirred, something small, something alive. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was more than fear. It was the beginning of curiosity, of maybe I'm not ready to give you what you want. Clara said, her voice barely above a breath, and for the first time, Nathaniel smiled. Not the smile of a man who had won something, but the smile of someone who understood exactly what that moment meant. "But I don't think I can walk away either." The words slipped from Clara's lips so quietly she wasn't sure she had said them aloud. "I can't go back," she added, her voice raw, "to who I was before. You've already changed something in me. Nathaniel, I don't know what that means yet, but it means something." For a moment he didn't speak. But his eyes, those always watchful, unreadable eyes, softened. Not with triumph, not with satisfaction, but with quiet understanding. "I'm not asking you for anything," he said. "Not love, not promises. I just want you to find you again, and if I get to be beside you while you do, then I'll be here, but I won't reach. Not until you're ready." Clara looked at him, stunned by the simplicity of his offering. He wasn't molding her into someone else. He wasn't demanding she play the part of a perfect wife in a perfect world. He was giving her what no one else had time to heal. Permission to be uncertain. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was the first light of something more fragile, flickering like dawn, pressing through the cracks of a long, dark night. And maybe for now, that was enough. The weeks that followed were uneven, a dance between clarity and confusion. There were mornings where Clara awoke to the soft glow of light slipping through velvet curtains, and for a breathless moment she forgot. Forgot how she came to be in this house, forgot the contract, the expectations, the quiet grief. But reality always crept back in the cold stretch of the sheets beside her, in the silence that filled the halls. In the careful way Nathaniel still kept his distance. True to his word, he had never crossed the line. He was courteous, thoughtful, even gentle, but also distant. Distant in the way a stranger is polite, yet unreachable. They shared meals, spoke of business, the weather news headlines, but never of them. Clara sometimes wondered if they were simply orbiting each other, both unsure how to bridge the distance that had formed between obligation and possibility. And in the quiet, when the air grew too still and her chest felt too heavy, she thought of her old life. Of the girl who once believed love would come freely, not as a bargain. One evening, tucked away in the estate's old study, Clara sat cross-legged in a velvet chair, an old photo album spread across her lap. The pages held her parents' smiles, their youth frozen in faded ink. She traced their faces with her fingers. She didn't hear the footsteps at first, but then a shadow stretched across the floor. She turned, startled, to find Nathaniel in the doorway. His suit jacket was off. His expression was softer, and in his eyes something had changed. Not just the usual distance, but a quiet question. Waiting. "May I come in?" he asked, voice low. Clara nodded, closing the album gently. He stepped inside and shut the door behind him, then paused. He didn't speak, just stood there watching her as though weighing something fragile in his thoughts. Tonight didn't feel like routine. Tonight felt different. Clara reached for the pen on the desk, without thinking, her fingers fidgeting across its smooth surface, a gesture more about nerves than purpose. Behind her, Nathaniel shifted Clara. Her name landed softly in the quiet room. It was the first time in weeks that he had said it without formality, without the echo of politeness behind it. This time, it carried weight. "I know I've been distant." He paused. His voice was steady, but something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. "I thought you needed time-space, and maybe I was right, but I also know I can't keep pretending nothing is happening here. That the silence between us is comfortable. It's not." Clara turned to face him, her breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice just above a whisper. Nathaniel took a step forward. His eyes stayed on hers, unwavering. "I don't want to live in a house where we pass each other like strangers. I don't want this to be just another arrangement. A transaction dressed in white and sealed with a signature. She wasn't ready for this. Not for the honesty, not for the rawness in his words, but part of her had longed for it. I never wanted this marriage either. She admitted, her words coming out before she could guard them. But it's what I have now, it's what we have, and I don't know what to do with it, or with you. Nathaniel didn't flinch. If anything, his expression softened. But beneath the softness, there was something fierce. Not anger? Conviction? I don't expect you to love me, Clara. I never have. But I can't bear the thought of being nothing more than a name beside yours. He paused, and his next words came quieter, almost hesitant. I want to know who you are. I want to be more than just the man you happen to share a last name with. Clara's heart pounded her chest, rising with every uneven breath. She had always seen Nathaniel as composed, invulnerable, untouchable, the kind of man who didn't need anyone, let alone her. But now he stood before her, not as the billionaire, not as the stranger, but as a man stripped of defense, and he looked as lost as she felt. I don't know how to let you in, she said at last. Her voice cracked at the edges. I don't know how to trust anymore. Not after everything. Not after everyone I believed in. Let me fall. Nathaniel closed the distance slowly, carefully, stopping just short of touching her. I'm not asking for your trust all at once, he said, but I'm asking for a chance. To show you I'm not them. I'm not your past. I'm not here to use you. I'm here to give you back something no one else has choice. The word hung between them, soft but solid. Clara blinked back the tears that threatened to fall. She had carried her pain alone for so long, worn it like armor. But now standing here hearing him speak, not with entitlement but with humility, she felt the wall she had built begin to crack just slightly. I don't know if I can ever love you the way you want me to, she said, voice thick with emotion. She took a breath, and another. But maybe I can try, not for the marriage, not for what people expect of us, but for us, whatever this is, whatever it might become. Nathaniel's shoulders eased, his gaze softened. And for the first time since the day they met, Clara saw something in his eyes that wasn't control or distance or duty. She saw hope. That's all I'm asking for, Nathaniel said gently. A chance. The words hung in the stillness, like breath suspended between two hearts, not a demand, not even a plea, but a quiet hope wrapped in vulnerability, and somehow that made it all the more powerful. Clara stood frozen in the moment, feeling something stir inside her, something she hadn't dared to feel in a long time. A flicker of warmth in a place that had long been cold. Could she let him in? Could she truly begin to heal not just from the confusion of this arranged marriage, but from the grief she had carried since losing everything she once called home? Could she trust this man, not because he had proven himself perfect, but because he had stayed? She didn't know. But she knew this wasn't just a contract anymore. It wasn't about duty. It wasn't about convenience. It was becoming something else, something tender, something real, something she hadn't thought she deserved. In the days that followed, things shifted not loudly, not all at once, but gently, like snow melting into spring. Nathaniel remained patient. He didn't rush her. He never crossed the boundaries. She wasn't ready to tear down, but he also didn't hide. He was present, quietly present. He brought her coffee in the mornings, always just the way she liked it. He left small, handwritten notes on her desk, observations, encouragements, sometimes just a quote from a book. He noticed without intruding, he cared without claiming, and somewhere in that slow rhythm of ordinary days, Clara began to exhale. The laughter came first, hesitant, surprised often at the dinner table over some awkward shared story or a clumsy attempt at small talk. Then came the silences, the good kind, the kind that didn't feel heavy but comforting. He would sometimes sit beside her without saying a word, and she would let him. And slowly, she stopped looking at Nathaniel like a stranger. She saw him, not the man in the magazines, not the one with the estate and the tailored suits, but the man who was trying awkwardly, genuinely to build something that had never been real for either of them. And in seeing him, she began to question everything she once believed about love. Could love really grow from something like this? Could she, a girl who had built walls out of survival, ever let someone through? Could she allow herself to feel for him what he might already be feeling for her? She didn't have the answers, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to ask the questions. Weeks passed since that night in the study, and with each sunrise, Clara wrestled with the quiet shift inside her. The fortress around her heart was cracking, and she was terrified of what might rush in if it fell completely. Every day became a quiet battle between memory and possibility, between what she had lost and what she might be learning to want. Nathaniel was different now. He had never asked her to hurry, never reached beyond what she could give. But he showed up every single day in the smallest ways, with patience, with presence. It was both a gift and a burden. A gift because she saw him for who he could be, someone kind, someone steady. A burden because she didn't yet know if she could return that kind of offering. Every time she looked at him, she saw both men, the one who had once felt like a stranger, and the one she had grown to, almost, trust. And it was the space between those two versions that frightened her most. Because maybe, just maybe, she wasn't afraid of Nathaniel anymore. Maybe she was afraid of herself, of what she might feel if she let go. It was evening again, that quiet hour, when shadows melted into corners and silence clung to the edges of the room like mist. Clara sat curled in the armchair near the fireplace, a book open in her lap. But she wasn't reading. She hadn't turned the page in 20 minutes. Across from her, Nathaniel sat with his usual stillness, a half-finished glass of wine resting in his hand. The fire crackled softly between them, casting warm light on the polished wood floors, but the air between them pulsed with something heavier. A tension, not hostile but expectant, as if the unspoken was leaning closer, daring them to finally speak. He set down his glass and met her gaze. His eyes were steady, but there was something else hiding just behind them, something unfamiliar. Longing, and beneath it something even rarer, vulnerability. "Clara," he began, voice low. "I've been thinking about us, about what we're building or trying to, and He exhaled. "I don't want to keep pretending this is just circumstance." Clara's heart skipped. "I don't want to be strangers under the same roof." It was the first time he had spoken so plainly about the space between them. She didn't know how to answer. For so long, she had guarded every part of herself, convinced that to let anyone in was to risk everything. But now, here he was, standing at the edge of her fear, with nothing but truth in his hands. "I don't know how to let you in," she whispered. The words tasted like surrender. "I don't know how to love you. I don't even know how to start." The room felt still, not frozen, but reverent, like it was holding its breath. Nathaniel didn't respond right away. He rose slowly, his steps deliberate. He walked toward her with the quietness of someone approaching a wounded animal, not with fear, but with care. He stopped just short of reaching her. He didn't touch her, but he was close. So close she could feel the warmth of his presence, the subtle scent of his cologne, cedarwood, and something fresh like the start of rain. It grounded her. She didn't flinch. She didn't flee. She waited. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" he asked, his voice a whisper wrapped in gravity. Clara shook her head, unsure, vulnerable. "I see a woman who's been hurt," he said. "A woman who was left to carry grief too heavy for her shoulders. I see someone who's afraid to trust, afraid to need, because everyone she needed turned their back." She lowered her eyes, but his voice didn't falter. "But I also see someone who's still standing, who didn't disappear, who wakes up every morning and tries, even if no one sees it." Her throat tightened. His words struck places she hadn't let anyone near, You're stronger than you know, Clara. Stronger than most. She blinked hard, fighting the tears pressing behind her eyes. Not because she didn't want to cry, but because it had been so long since anyone had seen her. Not the broken version, not the obligation, but the woman beneath it all, aching, surviving, and somehow still hoping. And in Nathaniel's eyes, for the first time, she saw that he did see her. I don't want to be a stranger to you, Nathaniel said softly, taking one small step closer. I want to be someone you can count on, someone who stays. The vulnerability in his voice caught Clara off guard. She had only ever seen him as composed, the man who always knew what to say, who never stumbled, who made decisions without blinking. The kind of man untouched by doubt. But standing before her now, she saw something else. Not the businessman, not the husband by arrangement, but a man, one who was just as unsure, just as guarded, and just as scared of being seen. I don't know how to do this, Clara whispered. Her voice trembled as the truth slipped out. I don't know how to stop holding on to the past, how to trust you, when I'm still learning how to trust myself. For a long moment, Nathaniel said nothing. Then slowly he reached out. His hand brushed the side of her face, a touch so gentle it made her breath hitch. He didn't move closer, didn't ask for more. He simply let his hand rest there like an anchor in a storm. And for once, Clara didn't flinch. You don't have to trust me today, he murmured, his voice low and steady. I'll never ask for more than you can give. I'm not here for promises. I'm just asking for a chance to show you I'm not leaving, even if it takes years. I'll be here. His words didn't ask, they offered. And in that offering, something within her broke, not in pain, but in release. She had spent so long behind walls, she didn't even know how to lower them. But now, in this moment, Nathaniel wasn't asking her to tear them down. He was simply asking her to open a door. Just a little. Clara opened her eyes and looked at him. There it was, in his gaze, the same fear, the same hope, the same ache to be let in. They weren't as different as she'd believed. I'm not ready to love you, she said, her voice fragile but no longer afraid. But I want to try. I want to try trusting you. Nathaniel's expression softened as his hand moved to gently cradle her cheek. His thumb brushed across her skin, warm and reverent. And for the first time since they stood at that altar, Clara felt a shift, quiet but certain. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was real. Thank you, Nathaniel whispered, his voice roughened by emotion. That's all I've ever wanted, a chance. The words didn't vanish into the silence. They lingered like a shared heartbeat. And in that moment, Clara knew she wasn't alone anymore. She didn't know what lay ahead. She didn't know if she would ever give Nathaniel all of herself. But now the road no longer stretched out in solitude. They were walking it together, unsure, unfinished, but no longer pretending. As the weeks became months, the estate, once too grand, too hollow, began to shift. Slowly, subtly, the walls that had once closed in around Clara now softened. The cold marble halls that once echoed with loneliness began to hum with something gentler, the quiet sounds of living. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She was no longer surviving. She was beginning, just beginning to belong. Nothing, this fragile, this deep, could ever change overnight. But Clara had started to believe that maybe she wasn't walking through this life alone anymore. Nathaniel hadn't changed much in appearance, still sharp in his suits, still carrying the air of certainty that had first unsettled her. But something beneath the surface was shifting, quietly, patiently. The man who once seemed untouchable was now letting his guard down, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet peeling away of walls. And perhaps without realizing she had started doing the same, he never asked for more than she could give. He never reached before she was ready. Instead, He showed up day after day, not demanding her affection, but offering his presence like a steady flame in a dark room. There were moments when she'd catch him watching her, not with expectation, but with wonder, as if he was trying to understand the silences she still didn't know how to fill with words. And in those glances, Clara saw something rare, not pity, not desire, but respect, a kind of reverence for the parts of her that were still healing. Slowly, she had begun to understand him too. Nathaniel, the man she once thought was cold, had shown her pieces of himself she never expected to see. His strength, she realized, came not from how little he felt, but from how much he dared to feel and still carried on. He had lived in solitude too long, had taught himself to need no one, but now he was offering something real. Not control, not safety, but possibility. One evening, under the soft golden glow of candlelight, they sat across from each other at the dining table. The meal had been prepared by his own hands, a rare gesture he had insisted on. Clara had tried to object, smiling awkwardly at his effort, but he had only shrugged. "I wanted to do something for you," he had said, and somehow that small sentence meant more than anything elaborate ever could. She ate slowly, not because of the food, but because of the way he looked at her across the table, not with charm, but with quiet intention. And when the dishes had been cleared and the soft hush of evening settled in, Nathaniel spoke again. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low, "about us, about what this is becoming." Clara looked up. "I know I said I wouldn't push you," he continued, "and I meant it. I still mean it, but I want to be honest with you. I want more." Her heart fluttered. "I want more than polite conversation and careful distance. I want a life with you. Not just as my wife, but as you. As the woman I'm learning to care about." Clara couldn't breathe for a moment, not because she was afraid, but because something new was blooming inside her. Not fear, not confusion. Hope. It was a strange thing to feel something she had buried long ago beneath grief, guilt, and survival. But now Nathaniel was standing in front of her, not asking her to be anyone else, not demanding anything she wasn't ready to give. He was offering her what she never thought she could have: a life with choice, with care, and maybe, someday, with love. "I'm not asking for anything grand," Nathaniel said, his voice barely above a whisper, the kind of voice a person uses when they're afraid their truth might be too fragile to survive the air. "I'm just asking for a chance to prove I can be the man you need, the one you deserve." Clara felt her breath catch in her chest. There were too many emotions rising, too many thoughts crashing together like waves, but all she could do was stand there silent and look at him. Look at the man who had never once forced himself into her space, who had offered respect where she had expected distance and kindness, where she had braced for control. She had spent so long building walls, layering them with caution, silence, and grief, and now he wasn't asking her to tear them down. He was asking to stand beside them, patiently, quietly. "Nathaniel," she breathed, her voice trembling, "I don't know how to love you, not the way you probably hope for. I don't even know if I can." She paused, steadying herself. "But I want to try. I don't want to live the rest of my life hiding behind these walls. Maybe we can figure this out together." Nathaniel's face shifted, not dramatically but gently. A softening, a silent exhale of emotion long held back. Then, for the first time in their marriage, he closed the space between them. He reached out slowly, reverently, not to possess, not to claim, but simply to connect. His hand found hers warm and steady. The touch didn't overwhelm, it anchored. "I'm not asking for love today," he said softly. "I'm asking for us, for a beginning." The room fell still, the air thick with meaning not from grand declarations, but from a shared understanding that this was real. Clara felt something inside her shift. The walls didn't fall, but they shuddered, unsure of their own strength. She didn't feel afraid. Not of Nathaniel, not of what this might become. He gave her hand a small squeeze, his thumb moving in quiet rhythm across her skin, a gesture so simple, and yet it felt like the beginning of something vast. For the first time, Clara saw herself through his eyes, not broken, not burdened, but seen. He wasn't asking her to be anything more than who she was in that moment, and that somehow was everything. "I'm here," Nathaniel said, voice low and full of quiet promise. "Whenever you're ready." "I'm here." Clara didn't know what the future held. She didn't know how long it would take for trust to bloom, or if love would ever come. But she knew one thing. She was no longer alone in this story. They were both here, both healing, both trying. As they sat together in the soft hush of candlelight, hands gently intertwined, Clara let herself imagine not the fantasy she had once dreamed of as a girl, but something real, a life of shared silences and small steps, of building trust, not with declarations, but with presence, of choosing each other one moment at a time. She allowed herself to believe that something true might grow from this, not because it was perfect, but because they were finally honest with one another. And for the first time, Clara envisioned a life where she wasn't simply surviving, but living, not just married, but connected. And for now, that was more than enough. The story of Clara and Nathaniel is not one of instant love or perfect beginnings. It is a story woven through silence, vulnerability, and the slow unraveling of the walls they had both built to survive Clara. A woman once forced into a life she didn't choose, carried with her the weight of grief, abandonment, and a heart closed off by necessity. Nathaniel, a man shaped by success but haunted by solitude, stood at her side, patient and present, when no one else had ever stayed. Their journey wasn't about sweeping gestures. It was found in the quiet. In the mornings, he remembered her coffee. In the dinners, he cooked not out of duty but care, in the way she finally let herself laugh without apology. In the moments when neither spoke, but both stayed over time, Clara began to see that her worth was never tied to what she had lost. She wasn't a product of her past, nor a prisoner of her pain. She was someone capable of trust, capable of love, not the naive kind, but the kind built slowly, deliberately, with courage. And Nathaniel, the man she once saw as cold and unreachable, began to show her who he truly was. Not a fortress, but a man who had been afraid to hope, a man who dared at last to reach for connection, even if it meant risking everything. Their story wasn't about perfection, it was about presence and persistence. Together they discovered something quiet but powerful, that love doesn't have to be loud to be real, that trust isn't given once it's earned again and again. That healing is not a destination but a shared path walked slowly, hand in hand. The relationship between Clara and Nathaniel teaches us that love isn't always born in ideal circumstances. Sometimes it is forged in the aftermath when we are raw, uncertain, and learning how to live again. Clara's transformation reminds us that even after great loss, we are capable of rising, that our tenderness is not weakness, it is where strength begins. And Nathaniel's evolution shows that true power lies not in control, but in the courage to open up to be seen and to stay. We all carry scars, but sometimes in the right company, those scars don't isolate us, they connect us. In the end, this wasn't just a story about Clara and Nathaniel. It was a story about all of us, about what it means to love even when it's hard, to trust even when we've been broken, to let someone in when every part of us wants to run. They didn't find love in a moment. They built it slowly, silently, in the spaces where patience met pain and kindness met courage, because sometimes the strongest kind of love is the one that doesn't start with fireworks, but with a soft voice saying, "I'm here, and I'm not leaving." So if this story moved you even just a little, if it reminded you of your own journey or the one you still hope to begin, we'd love for you to stay with us. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, because here, every story is told with heart, and every heart deserves to be heard. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. And remember, even the quietest stories can change everything.